I'm Tommy Salmons. This is year 0. I invited Matrhew Hoh on the podcast. Matrhew is a war veteran and a writer, and he has openly talked about suffering from PTSD, and we wanted to get a podcast out about PTSD and how it's affecting soldiers, why it's affecting soldiers, and what is happening during the time of perpetual war. And being the first time we got on and chatted with each other, it turned into a Rogan-esque type of interview in which we discuss PTSD for about an hour, and then we have another 45 minutes to an hour of random conversation about politics and, the way that the political teams are structured, I guess you could say. And I think you'll enjoy it. I think this is going to be a fun conversation for all of you. So here is my interview with Matrhew Hoh.
Okay, I am here with Matrhew Hoh. Matrhew is a veteran, and he has served much of his life overseas fighting for your freedoms, as you would be told. But I think Matrhew might have a little bit of a different story, and he might shed some light on what's going on with the future generations of military men and women and what they're dealing with. How you doing, Matrhew?
Good, Tommy. Thank you for having me on.
I'm so excited to have you on. It's one of the episodes I've actually contemplated so long. I'm nervous, even though you and I chat on Facebook fairly regularly, we'll
yeah.
each other stuff. But it's not that I'm nervous because I think that you're such a celebrity. I'm nervous because I think it's so impactful, And
good.
So I think it's a really important episode we're about to record here.
Terrific. Yeah. Well, again, thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate it very much.
Yeah. I appreciate everything you do. Before we get too far into the weeds and the conversation we're going to have, I just want to let you know that I do appreciate you being willing to speak out on your personal struggles and the things that you've had to deal with, because it's not easy for everybody to do that.
Yeah, thanks. But, I speak out because it does help me. It does help to talk about it. It does help to get it out. It does help to normalize it, to a degree. But I also do it because one of the reasons why, it may be the main reason why I started getting help, was because I heard other men and women talking about it, So I had a girlfriend who literally made me watch these videos, and I forget the name of the website. This is about 10 years or so ago now. And it was, guys and gals just like me, combat veterans talking about what they're going through very openly, very clearly, very, just very plainly speaking it forthrightly and earnestly. And, and mentally, that other people are going through it. You can read the newspapers. You can you recognize it because guys are killing themselves, or friends of friends are killing themselves. Fellow veterans, but it doesn't make that kind of impact. It doesn't hit that part of your brain where it makes it personal for you, even though you're going through all that stuff. You've got this door closed, I guess, in your head, right? That you're refusing to open to admit to your problems. I think much like any other type of problem. And, even though you just punched the refrigerator, and now you've got this big dent on the refrigerator, which folks, if you're out there listening, you've punched a stainless steel refrigerator, you can use a plunger to get the dent out. I learned that from another guy who had done a similar kind of thing. So, but no, I remember, my girlfriend at the time, Meg, made me watch these videos and, these testimonies basically. And, oh my God, that's exactly what I'm going through,
right.
Or and then, okay, well, they got through it. or they're getting through it, or they're getting better. Well, okay, let's keep watching the video. Or if you're reading something, let's turn a page and see what they did, and so a lot of it is just giving back, because other men and women have made these same kind of testimonies, spoken about what they're going through, spoken about their problems, their troubles, their issues. And and then I know other men and women will follow after me and do the same kind of thing. It's the only way we keep each other alive is by talking about it, because if you don't talk about it, guys and gals are not going to get help, and they're going to continue to descend. And the only way out of that descent, if you don't get professional help, is by, as so many of them do, you end up putting a gun in your mouth. So,
yeah, no. And that's horrible. And I mean, it brings tears to my eyes thinking about it. I mean, I might be extra emotional today for whatever reason. I've been sitting around thinking about a friend of mine who died at 33 years old, and it wasn't anything near like what you're dealing with. It was natural events, but I've been thinking about him. He was a friend of mine he was my longest friend, 20 years. And so I think that's kind of put me in a frame of mind to where I can talk to you about your friends. But before we get into details about any of the things you just mentioned, what I want to ask you, how is the new puppy going along?
Oh, thanks. She's good. And hey, man, I'm really sorry about your friend. I mean, you said it, the way he passed was naturally, but my thoughts when you said that was, it's unnatural for a 33-year-old to die.
Yeah.
Right? It's not. It'd be one thing, right? This is your friend, so you guys have been friends since you were kids, since you were
high school,
13 or so.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Since high school. So like, it'd be one thing if he passed away when you guys were in your 70s or 80s or 90s. That's, but it's not natural. It isn't the Middle Ages anymore. Right. I mean, like, our life expectancy doesn't end at 29 or whatnot. So it is unnatural, and I'm really sorry, because that's something, it's just hard to lose someone in at that age. It just is. It's because it's not natural. It's not right. We're not conditioned for it as human beings, that's why it's so awful when you go to these funerals and you see the moms, because to see a mother have to lose a child, it's just not natural for us, and segueing to like dogs. That's why it's so hard when we lose an animal, when we lose a dog or a cat, pet, horse, whatever, because it's not natural for us to have to give up and bury one of our children or one of our friends. It's just not natural right. Like, that's not how the human beings we work, in terms of our lifespans, in terms of our children, in terms of generations. But no, Lily is great. We just took about a 2-hour long hike.
Nice.
This morning. Yeah. We've got a whole bunch of man-made reservoirs and lakes around where I live here in Raleigh. Some really nice trails, and just really pretty day here today. So she is sleeping very well on the couch. If I walk this computer and microphone over there, you could hear her snoring. She's part pit bull, so she snores like a pit does. And the other thing too is that we're safe. We should be safe from her. There's a couple of dogs that walk through our apartment complex that she absolutely hates for whatever reason. So when she sees them through the window, she goes bonkers. But she's so passed out right now, I think we should be safe from Lily interrupting this podcast.
I don't mind if she does. I have 2 6-month-old pit bulls that might interrupt us. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen the photos. Yeah.
I know.
Gorgeous.
You were one of the first people that showed sympathy whenever Pinky died in December, and I really appreciate that. Like, that meant a lot to me.
Oh yeah, no, it's just it's terrible. I mean, like, and to lose one is just, you're losing a child, basically, in a sense of their dependence on you, but then your relationship, and it's something. But there's a great Kipling poem, from 100 some odd years ago, called "To Give Your Heart to a Dog to Tear," and Kipling wrote this great poem.
As much as I like poetry, I don't think I've heard that one.
I'll send it to you afterwards. And
absolutely.
To give your heart to a dog to tear. Yeah.
Love it.
And he basically says, like, you love this dog. I mean, like, he's so wonderful, everything else. But guess what? In 10 years' time, he is going to rip your heart in two, because he's going to die. because that's what happens. But the alternative is not to have them in our lives, right? So what are you going to do?
George Carlin had a
but
bit. I don't know if you're a George Carlin fan, but George Carlin.
Oh
had a
yeah,
bit
of course,
like that.
yeah.
George Carlin had a bit about that said that when you go to the pet store, they should put a warning label on the animal that you're buying a small tragedy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Yeah.
There's no there's no good way about it. I had a dog passed away 3 years ago, and she had a heart attack in her sleep, or something happened in her sleep, and it was her time to go anyway. Like literally, I was just trying to figure out when I was going to take her to the vet. And fortunately, I mean, she absolved me of having to do that, and it still sucked though. And she was a 13-year-old Weimaraner, so she had lived a wonderful, good life and everything, but it still sucks. Like I mean, everything about it sucked. The only saving thing was like I didn't have to do it. But that was going to happen in the next week or two, regardless. But no, I mean, I can't imagine having a life without animals in my life. But yeah, Carlin's absolutely right. Yeah, you're buying a future tragedy.
Yeah. And okay, how have you seen the German Shepherd since last?
No, I have not. But so for people who are listening, I had a German Shepherd. My wife and I separated in the fall. She kept the dogs, and then I came down here in North Carolina. So I ended up getting. My friend runs a rescue. I texted him, said, "Hey, I'm looking to get a dog." He said, "How do you feel about it?" Like literally almost right away, he texted back, said, "How do you feel about a German Shepherd?" I said, "Okay." And I ended up fostering the dog for a couple weeks, I guess is probably the right way to call it. Kept her out of the shelter. But she was like a 22-month-old, hadn't been to the vet in like more than 18 months, was completely untrained, wasn't even housebroken. She was the biggest female German Shepherd I've ever seen. She was enormous.
She's gorgeous.
Oh, she was gorgeous. And she
Yeah.
had the best disposition. She was a sweetheart. She was so wonderful, but she was completely untrained. And that was just too much. Not what someone who's got PTSD, someone who's got a brain injury, someone who's got, that's not what I needed. But she was so wonderful, but she was, but a shepherd, man. I mean, yeah, 3 months later or however many months later, I'm still vacuuming up the hair from her, but she is with my friend Ronnie, who runs this rescue, and she is at his place. He's got an acre of yard that's fenced in, and she's got 3 other dogs that are with her, one of whom is like this, I forget what he is. He's like a pit shepherd mix or something like that, a pit lab mix or something, and he's a psycho, that dog. All he does is run for like and so they're like boyfriend girlfriend now.
Nice.
And yeah, that's her. And he's training her, and Ronnie's good, and so he's training her. And so what happened was I said, Ronnie, this dog is just not, she's not the right thing for me, and because it's just, she's causing me problems. She's making issues for me because she's not trained,
Yeah.
And he said, well, how do you feel about like a 5-year-old female pit? And I said, fine. And yeah, basically swapped the dogs out. And I brought Lily home, and he had gotten Lily out of a shelter about 6 months or so ago. And she is just
she's pretty too, no doubt. But
she's gorgeous. Yeah,
a German Shepherd.
Yeah.
I remembered when you gave her up, and the post that you put, and you're like, man, like as much as I hate to do this, it's the most healthy thing for me and her.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But
yeah,
I know it broke your heart, and I felt bad for you because it had only been 2 months since Pinky had died, and I was just like, oh man, I feel so bad for him, So,
but it was, and I think if this had been a number of years ago, if I hadn't been through so much therapy and everything, I wouldn't have recognized that she was not the right thing for me, and out of guilt or out of some like misguided sense of responsibility, I would have kept her, and she would have made things worse and worse. First of all, I'm in a 1-bedroom apartment, which is no place for a huge juvenile German Shepherd. There's,
no
I mean, like
place
not
for
the
a
right
person.
place anyway. It's true. That's kind of true. I mean, like, yeah, it's kind of true, you know. But Lily, I mean, like, we take our big walk every day, like about an hour or so, and then we walk a couple other times a day, and then she's cool with sleeping the rest of the day, you know. And when I suffer from very bad migraines that can last for 15, 16, 18 hours. She is wonderful. She just lays next to me. She doesn't need to go out. She's got a bladder. I've never seen a dog that's got a bladder like she does. It's amazing. And it works because, like, there are times like I physically can't take her out.
Right.
You know, I mean, I could, but it would be very difficult and it would be very painful and everything. And she's fine. I mean, she literally is fine. She, you know, and then when I do take her out, if we've had this like period of time and I'm like, oh my God, I got to get the dog out, we go out. And she just kind of walks around for a while before she goes to the bathroom. So she literally does have like the greatest bladder I've ever encountered in a dog. And it works out very well for me with my conditions and whatnot, because, you know, dogs are a godsend for people who have PTSD or TBI, traumatic brain injury, as well as other types of issues. You know, people are very familiar, I'm sure, with all the different types of service animals that are out there. But, you know, in particular, you know, you with Lily, she matches up so well with what I need, you know, and then of course I you know, she's a rescue dog. So, you know, giving back to her in that sense that she's got a home, which hopefully she's happy with. She hasn't run away. So, you know,
Well,
I mean, assuming she likes it here. But
well, you got to ask yourself at some point, who's rescuing who?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Well, actually, that's what my friend Ronnie does is he runs an organization called Wags for Tags, and he pulls dogs out of shelters. And we have North Carolina, we have the highest kill rate for animals in the country. In North Carolina, every year we euthanize over 100,000 dogs and we euthanize over 100,000 cats. We have gas chambers in the west part of the state. We've got so many that they use gas chambers for the dogs. Yeah, because they have to do multiple dogs at a time. That's the only way they could get through it in a day. You know.
Yeah.
And so Ronnie goes, he finds dogs that seem right, and then he matches the dogs up with veterans. Yeah. You know, and then the dog and the veteran go through training together. You know, and a dog gets its good citizen certificate and everything else. But it's that bonding, particularly going through the training, that really connects the veteran and the dog. And, you know, Ronnie is also very good about making sure that the dog meets the veteran's needs, that if the veteran has anxiety issue, let's not get a dog that's going to cause more anxiety for the veteran. You know, so like he's very good about making sure that the dog is the right fit for the person who's taking on the dog. Yeah, and it helps. And it's not a big operation. He probably does about 20 dogs a year, but he really strives to make sure it's done correctly.
That's awesome.
And then there's also too, there's a host. Yeah. Yeah, and he did it because, you know, he got started doing it because he was a vet. He's a combat veteran himself, and he, you know, his family was estranged, and you know, and he was going to kill himself, going to drive his truck, you know, into a barrier or whatever, and he had a dog back home, and his thoughts were, well, what's going to happen with Sadie, you know, and that's, you know, and he recognized in that, and that's a lot of it, is that if you have somebody to live for. If you know, that gives you a purpose, you know, and from there you build.
Let's dig into that a little bit, if you don't mind. I want to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk about your combat experience, number one, and then get into how that affected you as a person.
Sure. So I went to war 3 times, twice to Iraq and once to Afghanistan. Twice I was on State Department teams, every time embedded, though, with the military, and I was doing political work. So I was always in the midst of the Iraqi or Afghan public. Excuse me. I was always with Iraqi and Afghan politicians. So I was constantly off base. You know, I was constantly out in cities and towns and villages, out on the road. So yeah, a lot of exposure to IEDs, a lot of exposure to gunfights. When I was in Iraq with the Marines as a mobilized reservist, I had command of a combat engineer company, and we were in Anbar province in 06, 07. And that was, very the second deadliest province in the country. So yeah, plenty of gunfights, plenty of IEDs, plenty of mortars and rockets. And, even the threat of it is something that gives you the PTSD. So very basically, PTSD is what occurs when your body's survival system basically is stuck on, where you've experienced a traumatic event, and now your body's fight or flight system, your limbic system, your survival system uh, is basically it's stuck. That valve that regulates your adrenaline and cortisol, your different survival chemicals, is basically kind of stuck open. And that's why PTSD exists for people who've been in car accidents or plane accidents, people who are the victims of assault, people who grew up in abusive homes or are in abusive relationships, anything that's going to kind of make you on edge all the time. Anything. And so in Iraq or Afghanistan or in war, when you're over there and you're there for 8 months, or you're there for 12 months, or some guys are there for 15 months, and you're basically hunting other people every day, and other people are hunting you. Well, definitely your survival system is gonna, freak out basically. It's not meant for that. Our survival systems are meant because a saber-toothed tiger was going to show up in our cave. Right. I mean, that's how that evolves, but it's not meant to be a 24/7, 365 system. And so and we have this. They've done MRIs and other scans of the brains of soldiers before they've sent them over to Iraq and Afghanistan to see what their brains look like. And then when those kids come home 12 months later, they do it again, and the brain has changed in size and shape because of those survival chemicals that are being kicked out constantly are altering the brain's composition, and so you come home. And so for me, even like you go to a provincial council meeting, or you're meeting with the governor or whatever you're doing there's always the threat of suicide bombers. You're just, there's always the threat of being attacked. So even if you had an experiences where you weren't under fire, you weren't, in contact or whatever with the enemy, just the threat of it is enough, because it's happening every day, is enough to, when you come home, you can't turn that off. And so you're constantly scanning crowds. You can't sit without your back to the wall. You want to be facing the doors. You're always looking for an avenue of escape, right? You're always looking for a way out. You're always sizing people up. You're hyper vigilant, and in the hyper startle, you're easily startled. So a truck makes a noise, or God forbid you hear fireworks. Fireworks do sound a lot like gunfire. So you're constantly on that. You're constantly ready. You're constantly prepping as well. You're constantly, you check the locks of the house. When you work out, you're not just working out to be in shape or to look good, or because you've got a 10K coming up or something like that, but you're working out because you feel this need to have to be at your max readiness to survive. So it pervades into everything. It pervades into your home life. It pervades into just the way you handle seemingly normal things. And it does. And then there's another part of it too. There's also the traumatic brain injury part of it, which for most of us has occurred later, because there's a latency with a lot of the brain injuries. Certainly if you had a brain injury where you took a blow to the head, or, you were knocked unconscious for a while, you have symptoms from that show up, and that overlaps with the PTSD quite a bit. But there's cognitive problems that come along with it. There's issues with migraines and sleep disorders, and then of course you have your nightmares, and both those are TBI and PTSD symptoms. And so the TBI and the PTSD overlap. For guys like me, where the brain injury is probably from explosive blast exposure, that's a lot more like what the football players are dealing with, where you have a latency of symptoms, where it might take 10, 15, 20 years for the symptoms to develop. And so like mine only manifested 5 years or so ago, when I was 42 years old or so
Right.
is when it manifested. And it had been, and at that point it had been, at least 10, 12 years since I've been around an explosion. So at least, and then, but you got another piece of this too, that is, I think, the prime vehicle, the prime driver for why so many veterans kill themselves is the moral component, is the shame, the guilt, the regret, at what they call moral injury. This idea that you've transgressed your own values, you've transgressed your religious values, you've transgressed whatever moral code you have. And that can come from a number of different experiences, right? That can come from a number of different circumstances. Chiefly it's going to be the survivor's guilt, right? Where something happens, you survive, you didn't save somebody, you're going to go home with that. But then also too, it's going to be, the witnessing, the killing of civilians, taking part in the killing of civilians, even just taking part in the circumstances of the war. That you were part of something that maybe now you see as not just illegitimate, not just immoral, but criminal, right? I mean, a war based on lies, and you took part in it willingly. You went over there a couple times, as well then too, just the taking of the life of the enemy. The guys that were fighting us were guys that were fighting us because we were occupying them. So you take part in combat, and maybe and then now years later, as you open these doors in your head, you let yourself have these conversations with yourself, you become exposed to more thinking on it, or you just become curious about it and allow yourself to have this conversation. You start to question about what you did, and you start to think about the people that were fighting us, and you realize that, hey, I would have been one of them. I would have done exactly what they were doing. And who was the guy who was wearing the white hat, and who was the guy who was wearing the black hat in that circumstance? And so the moral aspect of it is something that really causes the most distress. That's a complete breakdown, a complete tearing away of the foundations of who you are, of yourself. And, Tommy, I can't begin to explain the depths of the darkness that comes with that, the blackness that comes with that, the existential collapse that you experience. That was the reason why I still deal with suicidality. I mean, and that's the reason why I almost killed myself. And it's the reason why, I will deal with it for the rest of my life, because those guilt issues are still there. And that is only something that, even though this has been well researched, even though it's been known for decades now that guilt is the principal indicator for suicidal ideation in veterans, is combat-related guilt, for combat veterans, of course. It's only now in the last few years really being taken on. It's only in the last year or so that the VA has started programs to address the effects of killing. Right now in the entire VA system, as far as I know, and maybe it's changed in the last couple months, I haven't seen an update. There's only one VA center that runs a program, and it's called Effects of Killing, that actually addresses killing. Right? I mean, you would think the VA would have had something like this, but no. The stuff that you deal with in the VA, it's not focused specifically on killing or the effects of killing. It's more general PTSD, more general trauma related, and doesn't get into those issues that, hey, I'm having a spiritual, emotional, mental, existential breakdown because I took part in something that violated my morality. And wherever that morality comes from, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it comes from because you got it in church or in Hebrew school or, your mosque, or whether it's just something that was taught by your parents, or whether it's something that you learned yourself because, or it also too, a lot of it comes from the conditioning that we get in the military, the conditioning that we are the good guys, that we are the heroes, that we are fighting for freedom and liberty, but and that type of cliched stuff, which I don't think too many guys buy into so much, as that they do believe that they are there protecting people. They do believe that going over there is going to make the United States safer, that if we're not fighting them over there. We will have to fight them here. And then when they get there and they recognize what's going on, and then they come home and then they start thinking about it, they realize that that's complete rubbish, that that's just BS. That's just what the politicians say, and the generals say, and it doesn't have anything to do with reality. Well, then it starts really the effects of what they did, the effects of taking part in that killing, that really starts to cause, again, such distress that suicide becomes the only option out. It becomes the only way to stop, because that pain, that emotional, spiritual, mental, moral pain, that agony is so great. And you hear this from guys. You hear this from guys who lost their legs, who have different, same thing with me. I mean, my migraines are brutal. They've ruined my life. I'm bedbound a few days a week, et cetera, however, I would, if I was given a choice of taking the migraines or the moral injury, I would take the migraines, any day. Right. And so you hear this from other guys who've lost legs, arms, that moral stuff. That's the stuff that makes you want to kill yourself. The other stuff you can get through, the other stuff you can, you were probably an athlete in high school or something. You were probably, you were a tough kid. You were, you joined the Marine Corps, you joined the Army or whatever. They taught you how to get through pain. They put a big pack on your back, made you hump 20 miles, made you march 20 miles. You can deal with pain. You can get through things. But that moral stuff, man, that's the stuff that really, that is the I believe, and again, the research and the literature out there backs it up. That's seems to be the prime indicator for the reasons why combat veterans kill themselves.
Yeah, you made me think of Jordan Peterson, and in a good way, because he would talk about, at least when he first came on the scene, he would talk about how the major indicator of PTSD wasn't necessarily what you experienced, but what you did. And and so that made me think about that. Now I did want to bring up some of my own personal experience, okay? Because I never went to combat, but I know when I got out of the military, I was ready to kill anybody. I just did not care about anything. It took years for my personality to level out and get beyond that mindset of I am the baddest dude out here and I will just totally fuck you up. And so when I went into the military, I was 21 years old. I already had 2 kids, one on the way. And I was an angry kid, and I can't specify like generally why I was angry. I could probably come up with some like realizations and some ideas, but it didn't matter. I was an angry person. And I joined the Army, and I went into the RIP program. I filled out of RIP due to an injury.
That's Ranger indoctrination, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I filled out a RIP due to an injury during airborne school. I had torn a groin muscle.
Ooh.
And I went through training just fine. I had no issues with these guys yelling at me and talking shit. I thought it was actually kind of funny. But when I got to my unit and my wife left me, I lost my mind. I don't know if it was just like because of everything I'd been through, I was not set up for failure. I was so used to succeeding and the praise and the recognition. But when that happened, I totally lost my shit. Like there's no better way to say it. And I'd say I was gone mentally. I was gone for years, and I was struggling between the ability to survive and just to provide for my family, and also that struggle within that was I had an enemy now, and I wanted to put an end to that enemy. And so how easy it would have been for me to turn, like you say, to the dark side and do some really evil shit. And I contribute a lot of that thought process to what I was taught and the way that I was trained just throughout basic training, through airborne school, through RIP, and the way that I was taught to look at life. Like, how much of that like coincides with the toll that these men and women are taking on, and the death toll?
It has a huge effect. And, you know, this comes about, you know, various studies have been done, and there's some conflicting data and some conflicting studies, but it seems that in the military, and this is done because the military knows this, and they want to know why. How come you send guys into combat, they don't shoot their weapons? You know, and this is seen like in the Civil War. This is seen in Napoleonic Wars. This is seen, you know, there is a big study done by a guy named S.L.A. Marshall after the Second World War.
It's the entire reason that the Prussian school system that the United States now has adopted is in existence. It was to keep those people fighting for their nation from running from the battlefield.
Yeah, or not firing their weapon. Not
right.
Because they're why are you going to, I mean, it basically boils down to, you don't want to kill anybody. You don't know that person you're shooting at. You're scared and everything else. But so there's two parts of it. One is to dehumanize the other side, right? Mm-hmm. Make the other side just into basically a target. Take away any shred of humanity from them. And there's a lot of ways that's a lot of things that is built around, whether it's just the way the targets look that we use in the military, to, using, trying to deface or dehumanize the enemy. So you call them gooks, you call them hajis, you call them whatever you're going to call them to make them less than human. Right. And then you also too, you're trying to make them evil, right? So if we don't go over there and kill them, they're going to come over here and kill us, right? I mean, so you're doing that. The other thing too is to make the killing reflexive, right? Is to make the firing at the enemy, doing what your squad leader is telling you to do, calling for artillery fire, whatever you're going to do, is to make it reflexive, to make it be almost instinctual, to do it so that like you're operating basically on muscle memory, that there's no hesitation, mm-hmm. And that's the part of, so for the Marine Corps, I was in the Marines for 10 years, the Marine Corps, you send, a young man, and now women, because women can go into the infantry. A young man goes into woman goes into the infantry, and going to spend 13 weeks at boot camp at recruit training, mm-hmm. And then they're going to go on and they're going to spend about 6 or 7 weeks, between 6 and 8 weeks. They change the curriculum every now and again, right? So 6 to 8 weeks at infantry training. And then they're going to go to and join their unit. And then they're going to spend the rest of their time in the Marine Corps, the rest of the enlistment, training to kill, training to be in combat, just building up that reflexiveness, being conditioned. But then, Tommy, when they get out, there's no deconditioning. So it stays with you. So it's not like you're brainwashed, because if you're brainwashed, you couldn't think about it. If you're brainwashed, you wouldn't notice it, right? If you're brainwashed, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But you're conditioned. And so conditioning is not brainwashing, but it does. And I see it myself all these years later, 20 some odd years after I was in, after I went through my initial training in officer candidate school and the basic school and all that stuff, 20 some odd years after that, if I'm still watching the movie, say, and I ask people this, I say, if you're watching the movie and, the person is chasing someone and the good guy is being chased by a bad guy and the bad guy grabs him, but the good guy's unable to knock him to the ground and run away, do you think in your head, okay, now's the time for you to step on their neck and kill them? Right? And I'm still conditioned that way. And I'm sure you're probably still the same way too. You're watching a film or a TV show and something like that happens. Your instinct, your thought is to kill because it sticks with you. And, I asked my ex-wife or ask somebody else and they look at you like you're a psychopath, because you basically kind of are at that point. You've basically been conditioned to reflexively kill. And it's a problem because one, you're viewing the world differently than others. Two, things that shouldn't add up to life or death add up to life or death now for you. And then also you see other things where, the rate of domestic violence among veterans is extremely high. It's extremely high. It's roughly the same proportions as as the suicide rates, as the homeless rates, all these different things that we look at with veterans to say, my God, veterans make up veterans make up about 8% of the population, but they account for 16% of the suicides or whatever the number is. Veterans are 8% of the population, but they're and I can't remember off the top of my head, 30 some odd percent of homeless males are veterans, but only 8% of the population is vet. So they're overrepresented. Domestic violence is the same way too. This comes from years back, but Yale did studies 20 years apart. Yale did studies on this, and they found that it was basically about the same, that veterans account for about 10% of the population, but they're committing about 20% of the domestic violence calls involve veterans. So there's a propensity towards violence because that's what you've been trained and conditioned to do, to react, to reflexively kill, because that's what the job is.
Well, right. And what I was going to say was just, I wonder how much of police brutality and police killings is linked to that as well.
I think so. I just had this conversation. The friend I went hiking with today with our dog, he has a concealed carry permit, and we were talking about this very thing. And I said, it's something that I go back and forth on owning a pistol. One of the reasons why, if you have suicidal ideation, you shouldn't own a pistol.
Is it good for you?
So it's not good for me,
Right.
And I know that in various parts of my life, if I had had a gun, I would have killed myself.
Right.
But talking to him about it, about having its concealed carry, and in the class you had to go through, and the scenarios they put you through, and all the different legalities of it. And yeah, absolutely. As if I had a weapon, I know I would be much quicker to fire that weapon than my friend Rick would be.
Right.
Because the way I was trained, and in my time in combat, where we have rules of engagement, but those are, I tell you what, they're a lot more lax than what you have if you're walking around with a concealed carry permit. Ours was that if you saw a weapon, you shot somebody. So what happens if I'm in a Starbucks with my pistol, and somebody walks in and I see their weapon, and if they're just acting weird? Yeah. So absolutely. I think just from my perspective and how I go through life, and this is again being 10 years on, or not 10 years, 8 years on in my PTSD treatment, and taking my medication and going to therapy and doing all the things that are important for me to be healthy and to manage my PTSD and my TBI. Even with that, I know I would be quicker to shoot than a normal, quote, normal, unquote, person would
Right.
be. And I have to believe that that then transfers over to police. And I don't know off the top of my head, it'd be something definitely to look up whether or not there's been studies of that, because it should be easy to tell. I know certainly, you look at the work a guy like David Swanson does with World Beyond War. And David is very quick to say that, the number of mass shooters, veterans are very much overrepresented in mass shootings.
Yeah.
very much so that, I forget what the number is, but certainly it's disproportionate to the veteran population. And I think that has to be the case, Tommy, with police officers as well. I can't imagine being a cop and being in a circumstance where somebody has a weapon in front of me, particularly someone that, and also you see this though, with the way the police have been trained particularly over the last 20 years, where they call citizens, they call them civilians. I mean, calling people civilians, that's like a military term. That's like that's differentiating between you and the population. That's not a public versus a public and a public service relationship. That's a us versus them relationship. And then of course too, how, whether it is inherent bias or just also too, the way a lot of police departments are, their attitude and relationship with minorities, they're viewed as the other. So if you're a guy who's done a bunch of combat tours and you're in that circumstance that is very familiar to you in terms of being in Iraq or Afghanistan, but you're in Raleigh, North Carolina, or Cleveland, or wherever you are, yeah, I could see how it'd be real easy to fire your weapon in a circumstance where, as a police officer, you probably shouldn't have.
I saw the reason that popped in my head is the other day I was reading through some Facebook comments, and I saw a police officer arguing with a guy, and the police officer kept using terms like insurgent to describe people that he had taken into custody and arrested. And I was like, they're not an insurgent. They're just an American. It's just a person.
Yeah, they're a citizen.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so it really got me to thinking, it's like, how are the police being trained to think that way? And is this in direct correlation to the service that they have provided, as far as being military? And you gotta, at some point, you start wondering how horribly these perpetual wars, and just as much, if not more, about the war situation as I do. I know you keep up with it very closely as far as what's going on in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria, those three especially, not to mention Yemen and Somalia and Iran. And you have to wonder, how is this damaging the next generation? What is happening to the next generation of our quote unquote citizenry that going through these things, and what's happening to the American culture because of the perpetual war, and the way that these people see even their own very citizens as the other.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's that paradox, right? It's like a dialectic, because people are so removed from the wars. And you could have, particularly by class, right? And shoot, who was it? Was it ProPublica? Somebody just did put out a study that showed where combat veterans were most represented. And it was in the states that you would suspect to a large degree, Alabama, Georgia,
South Carolina,
as well too. South Carolina was one of them. And then you'd see places like Chicago, so urban centers as well, disproportionate. But you have entire high schools, if they're wealthy and they're white enough, where nobody will go into the military. So you have not just talking about people who are removed from the wars because of their age, because of their demographic, but actually the kids who should know other kids that are over in these wars don't know. And if you go to like a university and you speak at a university, and I've done this, and probably my favorite thing to do. But when you go and you lecture at these schools, these students will say to you, I don't know anybody, I mean, I know so-and-so from my high school class, he joined the army, but I wasn't really friends with him. We weren't in the same, right? I mean, like, so you had like that kind of thing, but, and so you have this, but they're also growing up with it all around them. And if you want, you can go on YouTube and you can watch video from, GoPro cameras that Marines and soldiers were wearing in Afghanistan. And you can watch them get into gunfights, and you could watch, you can go on YouTube and you can see IED explosions, and and there have been documentaries done, and there are plenty of podcasts, that talk about this stuff. So the information is there, but our separation from it is very real. And you bring up another point, Tommy, is that it is never ending, right? It's endless. And
Right.
so it just becomes the way it is. The fact that the United States drops 70 bombs a day or whatever overseas, whatever the number is, between 50 and 100, each day it's not news. I mean, and it hasn't been news for decades, because we were doing that in Iraq in the 90s, and it quickly became not news, and so this becomes the way of life, this perennial war. And it is something that the expectations that this is how life is supposed to be. And I know comparing the United States to Rome is very cliched, but with cliches, there are a lot of truths buried in cliches, right? That's why they become cliche.
Yep.
But I think that's the same way too, where for centuries Rome was you had Pax, you had the peace of the Roman Empire, but that was only, there was constantly legions, out fighting, and I think about the time where so Julius Caesar, Augusta, excuse me, from Julius Caesar, say through like Claudius, and this time of transition from republic to dictatorship or whatever. And that was like, you had to go and spend your time in the legions to prove yourself as a man. And that's why the Emperor Claudius was, kind of a joke or a laughingstock at the time, at least if you believe what Robert Graves wrote and everything else, because he didn't serve in the legions, and you have that deification here with the military where it is, you're becoming like a preferred citizen. You're becoming a better American because you served in the military, even though so many people don't serve, even though so many people are so distanced from it, even though so many people have no idea of what it's actually like, because there's that distance, because there's that lack of experience with it. There leads to this like glorification of it. There leads to almost like where members of the military and veterans are almost clerical, in the sense that we are often untouchable, that the rules don't apply. And look, we have special veterans courts, right? So if I go out and I commit even up to I could commit a felony. Actually, I'm not sure. I just moved back to North Carolina. I'm not sure what North Carolina's rules are, but in Virginia, we had veterans courts. I would go to the veterans court. If I had beat my wife up, if I had done whatever, I would go to the veterans court, because I have had experiences and stuff. And in some ways that's great, but in other ways it's not great, because it leads to a separate class. It leads to, again, this separate status for veterans, where everyone has to thank us for their service, where we can't be questioned, where, hey, I've got my dog is I don't think she's full pit bull, but she's part pit bull. I live in an apartment complex where we've got those crazy, stupid breed restrictions, right? But because I'm a veteran, the breed restrictions don't apply to me. All I had to say was I'm a disabled veteran, and they're like, "Oh yeah, don't worry about it." To paraphrase, Donald Trump, I could shoot somebody, and people would still love me because I'm a veteran. right?
Right.
You know what I mean? They would say,
Right.
oh, he's a veteran. You know what I mean? So there's you know, and some of it's good because veterans do need the attention and the help. And a lot of guys do have problems and cause problems because of these invisible wounds they're bringing home from war. But it also leads to excusing guys for things they shouldn't be excused for. And it also leads for not questioning, you know, the wars, not questioning the generals, not questioning politicians who are, you know, putting these guys on their shoulders and parading around with them to excuse their own political actions and excuse their own political motives. So yeah, it's a real problem that you're digging into, Tommy. Where does this lead to, and
Yeah.
how does it end? You
Yeah.
know.
Well, and you brought up Rome, and it just made me think of a joke I used to make, is that the Pentagon could declare war on Poseidon, and the military would be at the ocean firing bullets into the sea. Um,
Oh yeah.
and people would think it would be normal. And so
Oh,
I,
absolutely.
I've said that several times, that, you know, you gotta step back and think about this, not only from the human perspective, because I feel, in a lot of ways, I feel bad for veterans because I've been there, and
Mm-hmm.
I feel bad that they believe that what they're doing and what they're getting involved in, and they're, you don't like the term brainwashing, but they have at least been conditioned to believe
Yeah.
that what they're doing is correct, and it leads them to nothing but the Nuremberg defense, that I was just
Mm-hmm.
following orders. And that's sad, because there's no justification, and you can't justify what you were doing. And when you come to terms with the idea that you can't justify your own actions in any way, shape, or form, I think that leads you to down the path of PTSD, down the path of suicide, down the path. And we wonder why there are 22 veterans a day that commit suicide, and they can't justify the actions that they were involved in, you know?
Absolutely. And, you know, and there's a number of reasons why guys don't question what they've been through, don't think about the bigger picture, you know, don't express like that intellectual curiosity about what they've been through. And you know, so a lot of it's the group think. You're in a bubble. You get out of the military, you're still in the bubble because all your friends were in the military. You're still on Facebook together or whatever. You're still sharing the same kind of memes. But also too, you don't question because you're afraid of where that's going to lead. If you open those doors in your mind, if you start asking questions about what we were doing in Iraq, what we're doing in Afghanistan, you know, getting to the point that you were just getting at, Tommy, where is that going to lead to?
Mm.
You know, and I think that's why the simplicity of the Nuremberg defense, guys held that up like a shield, because that is a way for them to just, you know, not look at what they've done, not open those doors, right? Just say, hey, look, it wasn't that it was out of my hands. It wasn't my decision. You know, you're absolving yourself of responsibility. You're also absolving yourself of responsibility of thinking about it, of being critical about it, about examining it, right? You
Right.
know, because if you let that stuff in, how are you going to close that door? And you hear this. I've heard this from about guys who've you know, combat veterans who've killed themselves. You know, that, you know, he was the kind of guy who always had to ask about what we were doing. He was the guy who was always reading. You know, it tends to be maybe that the guys who do end up going down that path are the ones who have thought about it and who have examined it. You know, I mean, you do. A lot of guys try and find that the best way, but you know, by walling yourself off, you end up just having to build more and more walls, right? You just have to. That wall soon isn't enough, and now you've got to build it higher, and now you've got to put concertina wire on top of that wall, and now you got to build a moat. and now you got to put alligators in the moat. You know, you got to keep the defenses keep having to be fortified. They've got to be, it's continual. You know,
I'm
it's
starting to
continuous
think.
what you're doing.
I'm starting to think we're talking about Trump's wall now.
Yeah, good God, yeah, you know. But you do, you mean these, you know, and that's, well, I mean, it's the same way in some way, you know, with his wall, it keeps the bad things out, right? That's the
Yeah,
idea behind
the
it, I guess.
the
Keep the
unwashed,
badness out.
the unwashed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, all those unwanted things that are going to corrupt us. And if they come in, it's gonna, you know, how do you make America great again if the things that have made America not great, you keep allowing them in, right? I
Right,
mean, like,
right, yeah.
Yeah.
But all right, man. Well, we're running. We're probably. I think we're over an hour now, and I don't want to keep you too long because I know you got
Oh, that's okay.
your dog and your life, and Zoom might kick me off any moment now because Zoom tells me I have a free hour to record. But you know,
Oh, okay.
and my wife just got back. Hey, look at that! You hear the door shut? Yeah, beautiful.
I can hear a voice. Yeah.
she's talking to somebody on the phone. She never holds the phone to her ear. It's always on speaker. So if you don't want to hear her conversation, you have to stay away from her. But yeah, I know. What do you got to plug, man? Because I know you're doing a lot of writing, and what I would like to do is invite you back and continue
Yeah, sure.
this conversation because I think there's a lot here to uncover. I think that you and I can kind of dig into this a little bit and the psychology of people and things. And so we'll uncover a lot of things. So I don't want to give the audience everything all at once, man. Like you got to keep them coming back.
Hey,
more.
I mean, always, it's always good to thank my think tank, the Center for International Policy. They've been incredibly supportive of me for the last 10 years, all through all my different problems. They've stayed with me, you know. So I'm always appreciative of them.
Tell us about them
out
a little bit. Who are they?
So Center for International Policy, based in DC. It started in 1976, I believe, by a lot of folks who had spent time in both Central America and in Southeast Asia. And it's a think tank that is dedicated to reducing conflict, anti-militarism, cooperation. We do a lot of work on the arms industry, on weapons sales. We have a number of programs that focus on Central America, on Cuba. For years, we used to take members of Congress or other people down to Cuba. So basically, we're very left of center. However, it is also a lot of the work that is done overlaps with libertarian right, and so we actually find ourselves doing a lot of work with Cato. At times, some of the guys there.
Nice.
But
like Doug Bandow
it's
and people like that.
Doug Bandow, exactly, yeah. They do some. Cato does some great stuff.
You need to work more with Scott Horton. Why aren't you working with Scott Horton?
I go on Scott's show whenever I write something. Scott usually has me on.
I know
if it's worthwhile.
I know he does.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the think tank in general. I'm not talking about you personally.
Oh yeah. No, I've it's the way we work at the think tank is a little different than a lot of other places. We don't. The think tank won't take money. We won't take money from corporations, so we're limited to individual donors and also foundations who give grants. So that means that the way it works is that if you work there, you have to raise a lot of your own money. So there's only a few people who are there who actually are kind of employees in the sense that the organization pays them. Most of us who are there have to raise money on our own.
Right.
So yeah, it's kind of a way, and that's the way it's been done, specifically to keep the organization from one becoming, I think, stale or becoming just complacent, but also two from falling under the sway of corporations, from falling under the sway of I mean, and there are some corporations out there that have good intentions who might want to fund. Look, if you're a corporation that doesn't benefit anything from the weapons industry, and you understand that the U.S. State Department's primary role is just to sell weapons these days, you might be a corporation that says, you know what, this is not right. And it's not helping our business to have a State Department and a foreign policy that's geared strictly towards weapon sales, strictly towards supporting dictatorships, strictly towards supporting war, not really interested in the rule of law, not really interested in commerce, et cetera. So yeah, I mean, but so there might be some corporations out there that would be interested in supporting such things that we do at the think tank, but it's just been the way it was set up, and there's tough times, man. Trust me. Like now it's doing okay because people hate Trump. And when like George Bush was in office, we were doing well money wise because people on the left hated Bush. So you give money to the think tank. But when a guy like Obama's in office though, and your guy's in office, you're not going to give money to a think tank or you may not give as much because you don't think there are problems that exist, or why are you going to give money to an organization that's going to be critical of your guy? So you go through, and I'm sure Cato, and a couple of other good ones on the right. There's a lot of crappy ones on the right. There's a lot of crappy criminal. The think tank industry I don't live in DC. I live in North Carolina, thank God now. But it's like, you go to an event in the think tank industry and it's just so corrupt and it's so fraudulent. It feels like you've been bathed in motor oil when you walk out of it. Right. You are just covered in that type of
just gunk. Just shit.
Yeah, it's just terrible.
You can cuss, man. I ain't gonna get mad at you.
Yeah, there are people who are people who are, of course, great, and people who like Doug Bando, who actually are legitimately concerned with making the United States a better place, making our world a better place, and who are honest in their thoughts. But then there are
agree with them or not, whether you agree with them.
Yeah, exactly.
Not. Yeah.
That's
you
exactly
at least know they're coming from a good place.
Yeah, and I don't agree with most of what Cato. On the economics and everything, I'm not in the same place as Cato is, and on other issues. But like,
you haven't read enough Austrian
most of the
economics. Guys, that's not their fault.
That's I know. No, Scott would beat me over the head with that. Scott would totally beat me over the head with that. Yeah, we don't get into. He's funny. Like he will bring it up sometimes, and he'll accuse me of like what does Scott say? You guys on the left, you take your puberty blockers or whatever you do.
Scott's hilarious. Scott is one of the nicest guys. He's one of the best bridges to have between the left and the right.
Oh, Scott is wonderful. He's wonderful, and he knows this stuff. This stuff about the wars. I don't know anybody who knows it better than he does.
Oh, Jesus,
I really don't. I mean,
I'm so ready for
he really knows it. Yeah.
His next book's going to be killer.
Well, his first book is the book. If somebody says, "Hey, I want to know about Afghanistan," like, where do I begin? That's the book I point to. And then even for people who know it, people who I'll be around or whatever, people who know Afghanistan, I'll say, have you read Scott Horton's book? Because there's stuff in there that you didn't know, or there's stuff in there that you've forgotten. Because that's what I found when I read his book. Yeah, there is stuff in there that I didn't know. I'm like, oh my God, I didn't know that. I mean, and I'm a guy who spends most of his time reading about this stuff and dealing with this stuff, and I didn't know that. Or it's stuff that you forget. It's important. And Scott, and so that's why I'm really looking forward to this next book of his is going to be very important for helping us understand why we are in the world we're in now. I mean, he's going to do a wonderful job with it.
Yeah, I think so too. Did you read, speaking of which, did you read Max Blumenthal's last book?
I did, The Management of Savagery, yeah.
Yes, very. Oh, man, you want to talk about breaking it down. Like, he killed it. Mm-hmm. Other than his definition of a libertarian, but Scott called him out on that on the show. So
I don't even recall that. But yeah, he's just an excellent journalist. You know, and that whole
like
great,
him.
you know, all across the whole gray zone, you know, I mean, Aaron Mate and Anya Pampamril, if I'm pronouncing her name right, and Max, and I'm not sure who else they have over there, but the gray zone, they do really great work. They
Right.
are, I mean, they definitely have their view of the world and they're open about it.
Right.
You know, but their journalism is fantastic. They're
very good.
Criticize their journalism.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like Caitlin Johnstone. Like,
Yes.
you know, philosophically, you want to get into politics, ideology. I'm nowhere near these people, you know, but I respect the work that they're doing. You know, Michael Tracy's another one. He does some really good work too. You know, It really, a lot of your better journalists are, you know, left wing, like very what you would consider left wing in modern political like spectrum, at least, not necessarily historically. And so, they do some really good work. You know, even if they advocate the state, they do question like what is the role of the state, and they do some really good work.
And they and you see a number of them. I mean, whether it be say like Abby Martin and Mike Preisner, or you know, even if you look at like what the show on the Hill on YouTube, Rising, with Crystal Ball and Sagar.
Oh yeah,
and Jay,
that's a good show.
You know?
Yeah, for sure. That's a
great show. I mean,
I like it.
I watch a couple of clips of that each day, you know, I mean, because they are, you know, very honest, you know, they are calling out and they're principled. I mean, they are, I mean, I really do. When they say that they are for the working people and they come from different perspectives, you know, Crystal is, you know, very left wing, and Sagar is, you know, he's with the Hudson Institute, which is, you know, very right wing, I guess you call it. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I mean, but I really do believe that both of those people honestly have the best interests of the common person in what they are advocating for.
I don't even care. Nice I don't even care if a journalist has the best interest, as long as they are just honest. That's all I care about. Like Glenn Greenwald, I think he's smug and pompous, but I think he's honest. Like, so I'll read him.
Yeah, it's a good point.
You know what I'm saying?
I've never met him in person. Like, I wonder, like, how he is. Like, yeah, exactly. If you were to have dinner with him, is he somebody you want to hang out with? Is he a good person, nice person? He's got a big heart for dogs. He's got him and his partner have like a whole dog ranch. They rescue all these dogs in Brazil. So he's really good about animals. I know that. Yeah. Google it. Look that up. He's got they've got, I don't know. If you ever see like him when he's at his house, there's always like packs of dogs running around. He's got like 30 dogs or something like that. So he's got a good heart that way.
I could just be reading him wrong too. It's just my take.
He does have there is a certain smugness that comes across. He definitely knows how intelligent he is, you know. So
maybe that's what it is.
Yeah.
Just that.
But, you know, you compare these people to what you get on CNN or on Fox or whatever, and there's no comparison whatsoever.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's no, you know, there's just seems to be no depth to the people that are on. There's no, how can you trust what they're saying? You know, they've been, and the same thing too with the things that I grew up with, you know, understanding to be the aspiration for all journalists, say like the New York Times, right? You know, and now I shudder at that. I feel so. I remember, man, Tommy, when I was a kid, like, and you know, when I was like 13 or 14 years old, it was like a big deal for me to get a copy of the New York Times. Like, I would be so excited. I thought that was like the greatest thing, and I shudder at that thought now. You know, I mean, like, you know,
I'm just a late bloomer because I didn't even like pay attention to the news until about 3 years ago. I was told 10 years ago, you got a great voice for radio. So I was like, okay, I love metal. I want to have my own metal show. And then
cool.
I started reading news 3 years ago, and I was like, that's it. That's what my podcast is. I'm going to hammer the man. Yeah, and that's like all that I've been doing. Yeah, so this will be 113 episodes. Like we just
Wow,
been
excellent.
going after them. So yeah, and Scott is gracious enough, and I love Scott to death. Like Scott is gracious enough to put me on the Libertarian Institute blog and let me rant and rave and do whatever the hell I want to do. And he's not responsible for anything I say. It's all me. So,
he really is a great person.
oh yeah, no, it was last August. I got out to Austin. My wife and we went to a concert out there, and we actually got to spend a day with Scott. And
oh, cool.
We had a blast. Yeah, we went out on the out on the lake and on his boat, and he took us out to lunch. And he's just a great dude. He being a truck driver, it's really weird. I've tried to tell people. I was like, there are some people that don't like Scott because not even because of what he is or what he does or what he says. They don't like him because people put him on a pedestal. And I'm like, you know what? I'm a truck driver that's met Scott in person one time, talked to him on the phone 3 times, interviewed him 6 times, and he has texted me more than my family members to make sure that I'm okay out on the road.
Oh yeah.
He's just a wonderful guy. He's just a beautiful dude.
Yeah, he is. And I've never met him in person, actually. I've known him now for, I don't know how many years, 8, 9 years now, I guess, right? 8 years, maybe 9 years, maybe, and have conversations with him all the time. He has me on his show. We end up talking for however long, and
he will talk to you.
But I've never met him in person.
You will not call Scott and not be on the phone for less than 4 hours. He will talk to you.
No, exactly. He is. But, I was hoping he was supposed to go debate Bill Kristol up in New York next month.
They changed the date. They did change. It's still going to happen, but they did change the date. So
post coronavirus.
Right.
So I was really excited because I was going to go up there for it and everything. And so I'll definitely have to. Hopefully, it works out timing wise.
I think Pete's going to be up there too. Pete Quinones from Freeman Beyond the Wall. He's the editor of the Libertarian Institute.
Yeah. I've never listened to his blog.
He has a really good podcast, man. He's one of the better podcasts out there, actually. If I do say so myself, and I'm a podcaster, and I just can't keep up with his ass because that motherfucker is on fire. Yeah. So he's like, you remember, you're a basketball fan?
Yeah, I used to be. I don't watch it really anymore, but you're growing up and everything.
You remember about 10 years ago, Houston Rockets versus San Antonio Spurs, and the Spurs were up by like 13 with 30 seconds left to go in the game, and Tracy McGrady just hit a hot streak, and he made every 3-pointer that he shot, and the Rockets ended up winning the game by 1 point because that motherfucker could not miss. That's Pete Quinones right now. Like, he just can't miss right now. He's just.
I remember that because people were comparing him to Reggie Miller. And Reggie Miller did that in the mid-'90s against the Knicks. I'm a Knicks fan, or was a Knicks fan. I can't say I am anymore, but yeah.
He's no Reggie Miller. Reggie Miller was consistent. But I live in the Houston area, and so I remember that very well. And Reggie Miller was consistent. Tracy McGrady was anything but consistent.
So you're in a truck every day, so you can listen. See, particularly now that everything's shut down, I'm not listening to any podcast because I listen to them when I'm in my car, and I'm just not in the habit of listening to them in my place, which I should because there's no reason not to.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't watch TV anyway. Like when I come home, spend time with my wife. I'm gardening. I'm tending to the chickens. I'm playing with the dogs. I'm sitting by the pond watching the ducks. I don't watch TV anyway. So when I'm in my truck, I need something to stimulate me mentally. I can't just listen to music, though I love music. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I'm a 90s kid. I grew up, I mean, I listened to Pantera and Nirvana and Pearl Jam and
Uh-huh.
all the 90s metal and grunge and all that shit. But
Yep.
I need something more mentally stimulating, you know? And so, yeah, I listen to a lot of podcasts. I listen probably, I'd say 7 of 11 hours of my day is listening to podcasts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I'm always either that or audiobooks. I'm always drawing in information. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That's kind of my habit.
Yeah, I watch a bunch of things on YouTube, you know, and then you know, I
Jimmy
read a
Dore is
lot.
really good.
I watch a lot of Jimmy Dore. Yeah,
Jimmy Dore is good.
I watch a lot of Jimmy Dore.
I disagree with him on a lot of shit, but he makes me laugh. He's entertaining. And he's honest,
and
like
he's
we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
If you're honest, I can disagree with you if you're honest. Like, that's fine.
Yep.
I don't have a problem with that. But
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't mind that, you know, but I'm not going to listen to Jim Acosta. Like, it's just not going to happen. Or Tucker Carlson. I don't think Tucker Carlson's honest. You know, when Tucker Carlson comes out and calls Hillary Clinton a libertarian, I'm like, yeah, you're just not honest.
He said that.
Yeah. He calls
that doesn't even make any sense.
Yeah, exactly. Because he doesn't know what libertarian is. And so it's like, okay, like if you want to be honest with me and you want to like tell me like what's going on, but to compare Hillary Clinton's like intervention overseas or her economics to libertarianism in any way, shape, or form.
That makes no sense.
Absolutely no sense whatsoever. You know? And so I won't listen to him. I know he's good on war for the most part, but I just won't listen to him.
Yeah, exactly. I just don't any of that stuff. And I guess I could watch that stuff on YouTube. I guess I could hear that stuff on podcasts. I'm annoyed at YouTube actually because it keeps, you know, the corporate stuff is starting to really infiltrate into YouTube.
Really?
Right. So I'll watch like a Jimmy Dore piece. And then what it puts up next automatically is something from like CNBC, you know, or Fox. Yeah, right. You know, so rather than it just pulling up like the next thing of my subscriptions or something similar to Jimmy Dore, like say, I don't know, some other progressive, you know, host like Cenk Uygur or Cenk Uygur or somebody like that, right? Yeah, it gives me like CBS Evening News or something. Right. So definitely like you're starting to see the corporations really take notice of the the value that a platform like YouTube or a platform like, you know, the podcast, Apple Podcast or Android or whatever is starting to deliver to people.
Right.
You know, because they can't be happy. I know I used to go on NBC. I used to go on those shows quite a bit, and it's been years. It's been 6 years. 5 years, no, 6 years since I've been on really. And just because if you're not on Team Red or Team Blue, right? If you're not going to go on there and yell at somebody about, right? They don't really want you on. And,
yeah, go on Kennedy, man. You can get on Kennedy.
Oh, I don't even know who that is, but
she's this libertarian leaning Fox News host. And like, she has like Dave Smith on. Like, she'll have you on, you know?
Okay, yeah. Well, hey, I've had, you know who I've actually been impressed with? I don't agree with anything he says, and I don't like him at all, but he's had on people who he disagrees with is, oh, shoot, what's the name of that younger college? He's big with the colleges, conservatives, Shapiro, Ben Shapiro.
Oh, yeah, I can't stand him.
No, I can't either. But he's had on members of he's had on Code Pink people, you know,
really?
And not like in a Bill O'Reilly way. So like the only show I would never go on, the only thing I ever turned down without a reason.
Here's my problem.
Was Bill O'Reilly.
Here's my problem with having like somebody from Code Pink, right? Because it's not that I think they are completely wrong. I think their solutions are completely wrong. And so I would never talk to them. You know what I'm saying? And it's not because I mean, this is my podcast, so I want to talk to people about
do whatever you
being,
want, man.
yeah, I want to talk about being anarchist and in doing things for yourself. I don't want Code Pink to come on here and advocate for the government to shut something down.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, that's yeah.
So
I mean, you guys would
that's
agree
my
on,
main problem. Like that.
I
That's
mean,
my
you could have Medea on and talk about Iran. I mean, like that kind of stuff, like all
right.
that type of
No, I
things.
would,
And,
and I will
you know,
talk, and I
but
will talk to people that I disagree
yeah,
with. It's not that. It's just the fact that it's like I don't want you to give me government solutions to government problems. That's like
yeah, no,
that's not interesting to me. You know.
yeah, no.
So
Their solutions are would, you know, increase, you know, the size of government, would increase the regulations, would increase regulatory things. You know, they definitely have a much more top uh, uh, top down focus, right?
right.
Than, you know, a bottom up. You know, I mean, even I mean, that's why I'm a libertarian socialist. You know, I like libertarian socialism because it is bottom up. It's, you know, hey, employee owned, you know, direct democracy, you know, local is better. You know, federal government doesn't do shit except for, you know, things that make sense. Like, hey, should somebody be overseeing Boeing? Absolutely. You
Right.
know,
Yeah, no
but would be
shit.
better if the first thing to do, though, right? The first thing where you could reduce your government oversight is if Boeing was owned by the employees, you know,
Well,
rather than the banks. And right, I mean, that's in my opinion, right? You know, and this way you could, the
have you
employees
ever
would
read?
form. Yeah.
Have you ever read? I'm sorry, man. But it just got me thinking. Have you ever read any of Samuel Edward Conklin the Third?
No. What's his
Okay,
last name?
Konkin, Konkin.
Konkin. Okay.
All right. So what he came up with was the New Libertarian Manifesto, and it was basically agorism, right? Counter economics, working in the gray and black markets, outside of the white markets, outside of the red markets, outside of the pink markets. So you're working in the gray and the black markets. So therefore, like a gray market would be like legal things that you're selling under the radar. So like
Yeah.
here in Texas, like a person gun sale, right? Like
Yeah.
that would be
Hey, I just bought.
gray market.
I bought the office chair I'm sitting in. My broke a few weeks ago or whatever, a couple months ago, and I bought one off of Facebook Marketplace.
Right, garage
Right? Met a lady in the
sales.
parking lot.
Yeah.
We Venmoed. I Venmoed the money to her. Drove away. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what he talks about, that because he was in the living room with David Nolan and Murray Rothbard when the Libertarian Party was developed. And he quickly abandoned the party and came up with his own system. So what he says is operate in the counter economy outside of the scope of government, strangle them of money, and you collapse the government. And you have all voluntarism. You know, it's all voluntary cooperation between individuals in the marketplace. And so when I look at that and I start looking at like the old anarchist thinkers like Benjamin Tucker and Proudhon and these guys from the past, even Kropotkin, whenever he wrote the Morality of Anarchism, and you start looking at these things and you're like, okay, so it's not about being, there's no hyphen. Like Karl Hess said, anarchism without hyphens, or you take it to libertarianism without hyphens. So you say you're a libertarian socialist, and I'm saying let's get rid of the hyphen and the adjective and just leave it at libertarian, and just say that, hey, I want to cooperate voluntarily, and however that operates, however that comes to fruition is okay with me, as long as it's non-aggression. There's no coercion involved in it. You know what I'm saying? And I think that people complicate the entire everything through the hyphens. I mean, even if you talk to, if you look at Noam Chomsky and a lot of things he said and he's written, he'll even agree with the market anarchist or the individualist anarchist and say, well, yeah, corporations wouldn't come to be if it weren't for government, because no corporation has ever existed without the regulatory capture device of government. You see what I'm saying?
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
so he still calls himself an anarcho-syndicalist, but at the same time, he's promoting the exact same things as the individualist or the market anarchist.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, these hyphens and these adjectives are just too dysfunctional, and they separate us all from each other, when we should all be just be like, look, the state's the problem. How do we get rid of the state? And we figure this all out on our own. You know,
Yeah.
like I'm
Yeah,
not trying, I'm not a monarch. I'm not trying to design a society the way I want it. Like, I just think that it'll operate better without
King Tommy and his magic wand. Yeah.
Right. Like, this isn't going to happen. I'm just not going to, I will fuck shit up. I promise you. I will fuck shit up just as bad as Donald Trump's fucked it up. And I got at least, I swear I got at least 30 IQ points on that motherfucker.
Oh, well, yeah, I know. Hey, this microphone I'm talking into's got that, right? You know, I kind of be, you know, I keep coming back to, I come back to, because I hate this division between corporations and government, like that. And that's like the false setup that we have in this country. If you're on the left, you're for government. If you're on the right, you're for corporations. And it's bullshit, because both of them are you know, I mean, Democrats give more money to corporations. They are. It's the same thing. It is, exactly. I always come back to, man, if you have more than 3 people in a room, you're going to have problems.
Right.
You know, like less people, you know, I mean, that's, and I do agree.
There was actually a study done. I can't remember who did it. I was talking to John Bush a couple of episodes about it. And he talked about it, and that's where he came up with the idea of freedom cells, and basically like creating small communities of like 10 or less people. And the study that he had read and that he cited was 8 people, like 8 people or less is what it takes to cooperate voluntarily. And I was like, okay, that makes sense, because you get less egos, you get more people like, okay, let's talk this out, you know, less likely to have somebody that's violent or just aggressive.
That's right.
And,
just any of the relationship stuff, you get into jealousies, you get into, I mean, all kinds of stuff. People are just, how we made it this far, man. How we made it, you know, how our ancestors made it through everything they made through with all the other nonsense that we bring along as human beings. I have no idea.
Well, I can tell you exactly how they did it. I can tell you exactly how they did it. See, we live in a civilized society. They chose to be uncivilized, and that's how they did it.
Have you seen? You don't have television, but
I know I do. I just don't watch it. It's just useless.
Okay. There is I'm a big movie guy. I like movies, and I like TV shows if they're good. So there's an Australian film called Nightingale, and it takes place like in 1840s Tasmania, and and it really gets into how the English treated the Aboriginals there, as well as it juxtaposes in the Irish who were working there as to pay off like as parolees, basically, as part of their probation or whatnot, where they were sent there and worked, right? And but anyway, at one point, the protagonist, the Irish woman, is talking to this Aboriginal man, and she asks him. She references like one of the British soldiers, and she says, "Do you have people like that in your culture, in your community, among your people?" And he said, "Yeah, of course we do." And she says, "Well, what do you do about it?" And she says, "We talk to them." And then she says, "Well, what happens if they don't listen?" And he looks at her like she's crazy. And then he says, "Well, we kill them." You know, and the idea being is that we have allowed these uncivilized people, right? These psychopaths, these Trumps, these Clintons, these, you know, Obamas, whoever, to have these roles in our society.
Right.
that, in other societies, they would have killed them,
Right.
they would have killed a guy like Trump, because they recognized what a threat he was to their well-being.
Right.
And I thought that was so profound.
Yeah.
I really did. I thought that was so profound when she asked this guy, and his response was simply, "We kill them because there's nothing else you can do."
Yeah, they're no good.
Maybe
for
we don't
us.
have to kill them. Maybe we can send them to an island,
Well,
like the British did, right?
Yeah, well, like even today, like the shaming people and ostracism and this, that, and the other are considered like off limits. And it's like, no, these things work. Like you don't always have to imprison somebody to get them to behave within whatever norms of your society. Like ostracism works. Shaming people publicly works. Like you don't have to, but it's also, you got to look at the office, and you look at the executive branch and the amount of power that is just incorporated there. You look at police officers and the amount of power that is just conglomerated in that area. What type of people do you expect it to attract?
That's right.
Yeah,
That's
I mean, it's going to be the people that want the power, that want to abuse the power, that want to utilize the power for their own ends. It has nothing to do with society.
I got a good friend of mine. Got a good friend of mine. He always comes back to Norman Cousins' book, The Pathology of Power.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I can't remember if it was Cousins or somebody else who was, their thing was that like 3% of the population is psychopaths or whatever. And Shea always comes back to that. And he says, you take 3% of 320 million people, you get about 10 million people. Right. That's a lot of people who are running, and they gravitate.
Psychopaths.
That's right. And those people are the ones that gravitate, just like you said, Tommy, to the positions of power.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones who gravitate to becoming police officers. They're the ones who have no qualms going into politics and lying to people because they know what they want. In the sense of want from themselves, not for what the people want. Right. It's very easy to see how, psychopaths just dominate, so many things.
I mean, you got to think about it this way. Like you're a veteran and you've suffered through PTSD and you still suffer from it. It's still like a daily struggle for you. And
it'll be lifelong.
Right. But like, could you imagine somebody that fed off of it? And those are the type of people, that's the people we're talking about. They're feeding off of that misery. They're feeding off of it. That's the people that are running the country. Those are the people that go into policing and going to Congress. And, you get a Thomas Massey every once in a while. And whether you agree with him politically or not, you got to admit the guy is at least honest. We've talked about this.
Massey was the only one who had the guts to do what was right about that fucking bailout bill. He was the only one.
Mean,
and
he's the only Ron Paul that we have today, like literally, and so you may disagree with him on economics. You may disagree with him on all these other things, but he's in there for the right reasons. But the others, which other ones can you point to and say, well, I know that guy's honest? Like none of them. They're all crazy.
Man, on my side, like on the progressive side or whatnot, there are people who are going through, and Jimmy Dore has been on all over this, and Crystal Ball's been on this, and other folks on the media has been on this. Gray Zone, I think, talked about it. But this whole thing with like the reality of who AOC is that she's not the person that people hoped she was going to be.
I've actually been surprised. I
hardly ever give money to a candidate. I was giving money to her every month because I believe that when she ran and she defeated Delaney in New York and she was saying things but it turns out she ran that way just to defeat the incumbent. Now she's turning into an incumbent like everybody else.
My dad sent me a video whenever like she was first elected, and it's this conservative guy. It's not somebody I watch very often, but I know who he is. Mr. Reagan on YouTube. I don't know if you've ever ran across this show.
No.
All right. So my dad sent me a video and he's like, you need to watch this, because I was defending AOC on some of the things she was saying. Not everything, because I think she's economically retarded, but you know, like I was at least defending some of what she was talking about. It was
Sure.
like Israel and this, that, and the other. I was like,
Yeah,
look,
yeah.
like we don't have to be beholden to these people. Like, you know, like she's making a actual valid point there. And he sent me this video, and it was basically like she was a plant, and she was propped up, and she was conditioned, and she was groomed by these corporations to enter into Congress, into this position, in order to ease a lot of the controls and a lot of the arguments against corporations. And I was like, I don't know. But the more I see this, the more I hear Jimmy Dore, because I don't know anything about AOC unless the progressive media talks about it, unless like Aaron Mate or Jimmy Dore or what's his guy, secular talk.
Oh, secular progressive. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Secular talk. The guy that's been on Joe Rogan a couple of times.
Kyle Kalinske.
Yeah.
That guy.
Yeah. So if they talk about it, I know what's going on with the progressive, you know, with the progressive side of the movement, and hearing them talk about what AOC is doing, I'm like, this guy, Mr. Reagan, sounds like he was on to something from the very beginning. Like, as much as I disdain conservatives more than I disdain progressives, because I think conservatives just don't understand what they're saying. Like, they just don't get it. They'll say something and then they'll argue the exact opposite. At least progressives are always arguing for more government. They're never saying we need smaller government and then arguing more government. You don't get that.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Conservatives will say we need smaller government and then vote for a $4 trillion government. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So I have a lot less disdain for progressives, because at least they're a little bit, like I say, they're more honest, like where they're coming from. At least I understand where they're coming from. And
but I mean, it's you're right though with Massey. I mean, I've seen and the Russiagate stuff was awful.
Oh, man, horrible.
Tulsi Gabbard was the only one who did anything. She didn't vote. She didn't vote, or she abstained, or whatever she did.
Right.
She was the only one I thought who did anything. And then, but now she's supporting Biden. She's like going along with Vote Blue. I mean, so you're just you throw your hands up in the air because nobody.
And you actually thought that she had a fucking set on her whenever she abandoned the DNC and endorsed.
That's right.
What's his
Sanders?
name?
Yeah,
Sanders. In 16.
Yeah,
I hate Sanders. I think he's a retard. Like, I think he's totally stupid. I think he's a dope. I have nothing in common with that guy. But the fact of the matter is, it showed that she had some fucking huevos, and she was able to like step outside and do this. And then she just goes and endorses Biden. And it's like,
I know,
if you had any balls on you, you would have endorsed the Green candidate. You would have endorsed somebody
that's
else.
Exactly right.
I don't even agree with the Green candidate. But Jesus, if you would have endorsed Jesse Ventura, at least I would know you're an honest actor.
That's right. Or say I'm not endorsing anybody,
right.
or at least something. But then go with Biden. Biden's worse than Clinton in a lot of ways, I think.
Yeah,
because,
but that's what Ron
Biden's
Paul. I mean, when did Ron Paul ever drop out of the presidential race and endorse the front runner? That's not what he did. He said no. All these guys are horrible.
I mean, he never endorsed Romney.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Or Gingrich. Like, he was like, no, these people are horrible. Like, why
right.
can't you be the left version of Ron Paul? Like, why is that impossible to be?
And I thought it was going to happen possibly with AOC or Ilhan Omar, I thought might do it, and none of them are doing it. Rashida Tlaib, they're all falling in line. All of them. And they had such a chance, as younger women of color coming into the right, taking on, they had such a chance to really make their mark. And maybe they would go down in flames or whatever, but they're all young and they all have a future ahead of them.
Right.
But they're all turning into being like, I want my future to be 35 years in the House of Representatives.
Right. Well, and nobody can confuse Ilhan Omar or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez with Dennis Hastert until they sold out. You see what I'm saying? Dennis Hastert, that's exactly right. He's scum. He was the scum of the earth. He was a child molester. Why are you associating with these people? Like, why do you want those people to accept you?
And they all come from, that's why, because they do, because at heart, they're careerists. I'm still kind of holding out hope for Ilhan Omar, but AOC, everything I've watched and read over the last couple months, forget it. She's going to be in that seat. Maybe she's going to run for Senate. Who knows what she wants to do. Right. But yeah, I mean, because she could be she's got all the pedigree of being a rising star. She is, she's attractive, but she's a great speaker. She's got a way about her. She is someone who could go far. But she's going to go far because she's going to go along with the establishment.
Right.
And she'll be like Sanders, man. She'll be like Sanders, where she will go along with them for 30 some odd years, always saying something kind of outside the box that's not really outside the box, but compared to DC, it's outside the box.
Well, she'll
go along with them and say,
you can say whatever you want, but your voting record shows who you really are.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it's going to boil down to. Yeah, that's what it's going to boil down to.
Yeah.
And one of the things I had problems with Sanders, and maybe you can explain to me why. I don't know if you were a Sanders supporter, and I'm not accusing you of supporting Sanders, but one of the problems I always had with Sanders, beyond just disagreeing with him on the economics, was he never changed his mind on anything. And it's are you unwilling or unable to learn? That doesn't make any sense to me. 40 years in Congress, 40 years in the Senate, and you've learned nothing? Nothing, absolutely nothing you've learned.
Yeah, so I voted for Sanders in the primary, this last primary, because he was the closest thing, it felt good to have somebody that you kind of actually was kind of close to, someone who was hey, my attitude was I like a lot of what he's saying, some of these programs are good. However, as a person and as a senator, I don't like anyone who's been in the same institution for 40 years. No matter who you are, you're institutionalized. You're part of the system. He had made a grand bargain with the Democratic Party decades ago where he could be an independent. They would, so he's as slimy as all the rest of them. And I think, I don't know. I think it's going to be said about this campaign is that he was feckless, right? He just didn't have the courage to really go after Biden.
No balls whatsoever.
And you wonder why. Why is that? That's what I keep coming back to, Tommy. You're an old man.
That's his personality. That was his personality from the get-go. We saw it in 2016 when the Black Lives Matter girls took the fucking microphone from him. I knew at that moment, I was like, this guy's never going to be president. He's a pussy.
Yeah.
And nobody's going to look at him as strong enough to lead anything. But my point, my entire question has always been, how can you follow a guy? How can you believe in a guy that has never, in the last 40 years, has refused to admit that he's been wrong on anything? I've heard people say, well, I like him because he's been consistent for 40 years. Well, to me, that's a red flag.
I agree. And because I don't think he's the intellect of okay, say a guy like Chomsky, if you go back 40 years and read what he wrote, like it's probably along the same lines, but he's advancing in a certain
Yeah,
way
he's
that
developed.
Sanders
He's
is not
developed his
exactly. He still has it, and I think I think you're exactly right. Anyone who is not changing or evolving or developing, as you just said, over time is someone that I'm always very worried about, or someone that I realize doesn't know anything more than what the talking points are, or the one book they read 5 years ago, or whatever it is. Yeah.
Exactly.
Because you do. You mean we all, and particularly too, your transition from being a young person into like a middle-aged person, there should be change. There should be development. I mean, certainly, like I look at myself. I mean, I voted for Bob Dole in '96.
Right.
Like I was reading The Economist all the time.
I was a Ted Cruz supporter in 2016 against Trump. Right.
Ooh,
because we develop, we learn things, we move. Like I've gone from completely like believing that Ted Cruz was a constitutionalist, understood the Constitution, and the Constitution was the law of the land, to becoming a total market individualist anarchist, like in the matter of like 3 years. And it's because I wasn't like stubborn about what I read. I was willing to learn things and
that's right,
examine my personal downfalls and my personal biases, and look at things in a different way. And okay, well shit, I fucked that up, I was wrong, and I'll admit I was wrong,
and you're willing to be, and you're open to possibilities, right?
Right.
I mean, if I said to you, hey, in 10 years you may be whatever, you would say, it's possible. I don't think that's going to happen, but it's possible.
Yeah.
I mean, I could, right? In
10 years, I hope to not know anything about politics at all. I hope to be in a position to where I am like buried. Like, I got my nice property here. I live on 8.5 acres. I was sitting out by the pond before our interview. I was sitting next to the pond, watching my baby ducks swim around the pond with my 2 pit bulls laying next to me. Like, I want that forever. I don't want to know what the hell the fucking politicians are doing.
Yeah, that's a nice image.
You can come by anytime, dude. You're always welcome down here.
Absolutely. I haven't been to Texas. I'm trying to remember. When was the last time I was in Texas? No, I was in Texas a few years ago, actually. Yeah. But I've not spent too much time in Houston.
Well, we're going to try to, I'm not in Houston anymore. I'm actually east of Houston, near the Louisiana border off of I-10. But what we got to do is not this.
I've driven past there.
Not this May, not next month, but at least 1 year after next month, we're going to drag your ass to Austin for Childeberg, and you can come hang out with a bunch of anarchists in camp and just bullshit.
That'd be cool.
Yeah.
I'd enjoy that.
Yeah, for sure. But hey, like, let's really wrap this up, man. I keep saying we're going to wrap it up, but we get off on another tangent. Apparently we have at least 6 more podcasts you and I can do amongst ourselves. So we're going to.
That sounds good. I enjoyed it.
We're going to set these up, but make sure, where are you writing at? Where can people find you?
Okay, so I'm at the Center for International Policy. I also have a blog, MatrhewHoh.com. Most of my writing comes on Counterpunch. And if people are so inclined, I have a Patreon account that people can support me in my work. And I am going to be starting a video oral history project of the Iraq and Afghan wars shortly. So hopefully we'll have the first one out by mid-May.
All right. And I want to make sure I say, Scott, I know you don't listen to podcasts, so you're not hearing this right now, but this is a direct message to you. Get this motherfucker on antiwar.com more often. Get him on your podcast more often. Pete, I want to see some Matrhew Hoh published at the libertarianinstitute.org. Seriously, Like we need more Matrhew Hohs in our world, man.
Well, thank you. And hey, annywar.com, every time I send them something, they publish it. Eric's great over there.
Yeah, I know. That's one of the best places to read anything. And now that's where I first ran into you, was reading your stuff at annywar.com. And then I heard you on Scott's podcast. But I want to see more of this stuff happening. I want you people to cooperate with Matrhew, because he's a great guy. He's a wonderful guy, and he's been a great guest. And I love you to death, dude.
Yeah, thanks, Tommy. I really appreciate this. This was great.
All right, brother. We'll do this again, I promise, because we got so much more to talk about.
Absolutely.
All right.